Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 19th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates are coming from Bakhmut. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of storming operation, the Russians' airborne forces managed to block Bakhmut from the north and from the south. The Ministry of Defense haven't provided the info where exactly the Russians managed to block these forces, but we understand that the Russians, there are just two places where the Russians were able to do this. The first one on the north is in the vicinity of Khromovo, this territory, and when talking about the south, this is in the vicinity of the MiG-17 Stadium. Furthermore, during the day, the Russians reported that there were very heavy clashes in the vicinity of the hospital number 2. And some sources were saying during the day that this hospital was taken by the Russians. Later, other sources reported that there are still heavy clashes, but I believe that it's just a matter of not even of days, but minutes or hours when the Russians are able to take control over this hospital and to continue their offensive operation further in direction of Khromovo, this town. Furthermore, today, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes in the vicinity of Orekhovo-Vasilievka and Berkhovskaya water reservoir, the Russians managed to establish control over another forest lines and to cut physically the road that connects Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut. Also, the Russians are saying, some sources Russians are saying that during the retreat process from the northern part of Bakhmut from this area, the Ukrainians destroyed a lot of buildings. And the Russians are saying that there were a lot of civilians who were trying to who were hiding in those buildings, and currently there is no information about the destiny of those people who was buried under the ruins of the buildings that Ukrainians destroyed during the retreat process. Today, the Russians published a lot of video and photo confirmations of the situation in this western block of Bakhmut, this fortification. They published a lot of destroyed vehicles, armored vehicles, and video of those destroyed vehicles. Furthermore, the Russians published a lot of videos of destroyed buildings in this area. We know that this is the area where the Russians are trying to use their guided bombs, and because the main forces, Ukrainian forces, are located in this area. Now let's return back to the Western sources map. As we remember, this map has been updated. Now we see that the entire northern part of the western part of Bakhmut is under Russian control. So according to the piece of information we have, the Russians are moving along the Victory Pobeda Street, this one, in direction of Khromovo. And the Russians also managed to cut the road that connects Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut physically. And we see that according to this configuration, we see that yes, the Russians still haven't entered Khromovo, but we understand that this territory is blocked from the south, from the north, and I believe that the Ukrainians are no longer able to use this passage inside the western part of Bakhmut. And if they use this road, then their losses will be somewhere around 100%. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes on Donetsk front line, not just in the vicinity of Bakhmut, but also in the vicinity of Avdiivka and Spirne and Siversk, of Donetsk, Avdiivka, and so on, the Ukrainians lost 380 soldiers, 23 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, and 6 armored vehicles, and 6 artillery systems. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes in this area, the Russians managed to destroy 1 ammo depot in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka. That Krasnogorovka is located on Donetsk front line. This is Krasnogorovka, the warehouse of the 68th Jaeger Brigade. Furthermore, the Russians destroyed 1 headquarter of 110th Brigade in the vicinity of Avdiivka, and we can say that 110th Mechanized Brigade is the most hunted brigade currently from the Russian side. And also the Russians destroyed 1 fuel depot in the vicinity of Konstantinovka, this one of the 17th Tank Brigade. So this is about Bakhmut, this is about Artyomovsk, and we understand and we can start counting days when this town is going to fall. But this is not the most interesting piece of news we received for today. During the day, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes and duels and actions on the Siversk front line, the Russians managed to break at least 2 rotation processes in the vicinity of Belogorovka and the vicinity of Spirne. And you know that the Russians have changed their tactics during the 2022 and in the in the early 2023, we haven't received such reports that the Russians managed to break the penetration process and so on. And as I see, the Russians started using these tactics not recently. They've started using the tactics recently. And the thing is that it is very difficult to destroy Ukrainian forces when they get trenches and fortifications. And because you need a lot of artillery shells, you need a lot of work, you need to use a lot of drones for these purposes. So that's why the Russians took a decision to move their focus from trenches behind the trenches, and they started attacking the roads that connect trenches and the main land, and the main bases like in Siversk and so on. We know that there is the same story in Kupiansk and Liman frontline about the breaking of the rotation process, and we see that that tactic currently brings a lot of dividends for the Russians. For example, the Russians recently, during these previous 24 hours, published a lot of photo and video confirmation that according to the picture we got, the Ukrainians took a decision to leave Spirne. And before that, we got another update that the Russians, as a result of artillery duels, of attacks and so on, managed to break another rotation process in the vicinity of this town. Later, we got the picture. But of course, this is very interesting. We see that this is very interesting benefits and dividends from that tactic. But I have another question. And my question is why we still haven't received any photo and video confirmation of the fact that the Russians entered this village. And this is very important because, as I understand, first of all, the Russians didn't expect that Ukrainians will take a decision to step back from this town. We understand that it's very difficult to stay on the edge of the combat line under very heavy pressure attack, and of course, the only thing that soldiers on the combat line expect is another rotation process. And when they see that, for example, the third or fourth time in a row the rotation process is break, then their condition becomes very poor, and they may take a decision to leave. So I believe that Ukrainians that were located in Spirne took a decision by themselves to leave their position. And from this perspective, this is a very good piece of news for the Russians. But don't forget that according to the Prigozhin, the head of Wagner's, if you remember, he told us that there are at least 4 attack fists in the vicinity of Bakhmut. The first one on the south. There are 2 on the south between Konstantinovka and, let's say, Toretsk-New York agglomeration. Another one in the vicinity of Kramatorsk-Slaviansk. And another one, the 4th one, in the vicinity of Siversk, between the line like Fyodorovka, Razdolovka, Veselo and Spirne. So this area is also over-concentrated, over-accumulated with Ukrainian forces. And now we see that they took a decision to step back from their position. Something tells me that this might be some kind of trap, and the Ukrainians want to force the Russians think that they left their position to force them enter this village. And after that, they may start some kind of counter-offensive operation to destroy the Russians and to continue offensive operation further in direction of Popasna. So maybe this is the reason why the Russians are not in a hurry entering and getting inside of these towns. Another rotation process was breaked in the vicinity of Bilogorovka. We know that there are very heavy clashes. The Russians can't pass by this hill because this area is on the hill, and the Ukrainians controls the south-east part of Bilogorovka, and for these purposes the Russians also attacked the roads to this town. Furthermore, the Russians report about destroying of another pontoon bridge that were connected the forces in Kremenaya forest and with Serebryanka, with Siversk. There are very heavy clashes in Kupiansk and Liman frontline. The Russians are saying that as a result of the clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 195 soldiers. So from Kupiansk frontline to Siversk Donetsk river, and it's like a normal level of losses. And the thing is that the heaviest losses the Ukrainians had on the Kupiansk frontline. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area, and we see that the Russians increase their intensifying actions in this area. Furthermore, the Russians report that as a result of some kind of air clashes, the Ukrainians lost one Su-25 airplane in this area. Furthermore, the Russians report about at least 2 situation when the rotation process of the Ukrainian forces were broken. Furthermore, the Russians report about destroying a number of warehouses in this area, about discovering of a number of commandos group and so on. So we see that there are very heavy clashes, and it's unnormal for this front line. Maybe the Russians are planning to start something during these weeks, because everybody expects the beginning of the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. And of course, the thing that the Russians want to do and are able to do is somehow to break the Ukrainian plans, or at least to delay the beginning of that counteroffensive operation from the Ukrainian side. Very interesting updates are coming from Donetsk and Ugledar area. When talking about Ugledar, we see that there is also some kind of intensifying of events, of clashes, but in this case we're talking about the Ukrainians. For example, during the day on this front line, the Ukrainians lost at least 2 aircrafts, one MiG-29 and one Su-25. As we can see, the Ukrainians are using massively their air forces as they can. They're sending a lot of, like, endless number of commandos trying to get and find the weak position from the Russian side. All those attacks were repulsed. Furthermore, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made another attempt to attack the Russian positions between Pavlovka and Nikolskoye. They were trying to get this, let's say, residential area between these two towns and to split the Russians' defense orders in this area, and then to try maybe to solve the problems, the issues with these two towns separately. But all those attacks were repulsed, and as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 150 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system. As you can see, the level of losses of the Ukrainians on the Zaporozhye South Donetsk front line is also unnormal for this front line in comparison with the previous days. For example, during the previous few weeks or maybe months, the level of after the unsuccessful Russian attempt to take control of Ugledar in January and February, after that the level of losses of the Ukrainians were on the same stable level, around 30-35 soldiers per day. And now we see that the losses is around 150 soldiers, and mainly because of the Ukrainian intensifying in this area. They're attacking in the vicinity of Ugledar. They're making and trying to test the Russians between Orekhov and Tokmak. All those attacks were repulsed. The Russians have a lot of weapon, a lot of different types of flamethrower systems. They're using artillery. They're using air forces with the guided bombs. Of course, I don't see that Ukrainians have any chances to do anything, but anyway, they're trying to test. They're trying to find weak place, and as soon as they do this, if they're able to do this, of course, then they will make attack, because we know that Ukrainians also don't have any problems with weapon, with armored vehicles, with tanks, with air defense system. They were supplied with everything from the Western countries, and they need to use it, they need to test it, and they need to be sure, and they need to have obligations from the Western countries that they would continue supporting them. And to get this obligation, they need to start offensive operation, and they need to show the result. When talking about Kherson area, there are very heavy clashes along the banks of the river on the northeast from Kherson between Novokakhovka. We see that there is some kind of intensifying of clashes in this area as well, and mainly the parties are trying to attack each other on banks or on the opposite bank of the river, but the level of the losses is on the same level. The Russians are saying that as a result of the clashes, artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, 2 artillery systems, and furthermore the Russians managed to destroy another warehouse of one ammo depot of 126 territory defense brigade, but without any changes on the ground. For now, we see and we expect that, according to the Western countries, according to the Western resources, that Ukrainians are going to launch their massive attack somewhere in the vicinity of the 30th of April. This is going to happen very soon, and I believe that the Russians are able to take control Bakhmut over Bakhmut by that date. So the next week and the end of this week is going to be very interesting, full of different types of updates, events, and so on. And the final, but not the least, the Russians are saying that they published a lot of video and photo confirmation that during the previous 24 hours they made another drone attack in the vicinity of Odessa. They bombed some warehouses in the vicinity of airfields and so on, in the vicinity of the ports. The Ukrainians are saying that they managed to shut down around 10 drones of 12 Also, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, they managed to capture some Ukrainian commandos or scouts in the vicinity of Kerch, and as this town is located in Crimea, right in the vicinity of the Crimea bridge. Maybe the Ukrainians were planning to detonate and bomb this bridge, but the Russian special forces managed to discover that group and to capture them. So as you can see, a lot of things. The Ukrainians continue attacking and bombing Belgorod and the facilities in around this town with some secret purposes we don't understand. But I believe this is also another task, another game that Ukrainians are trying to play and to get as much as possible benefits from the current situation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.